You don't want these chairs. What's all that? Those are just that's it. Oh,
Wow.
Everyone down to you. He actually interviewed me for a job here. I knew him, and I saw the, when he applied, I was on the committee, right? So I was waiting, and then when the rankings, again, he was never like top five. I'm like, okay, well, I can say this.
Yeah, right, that's smart.
I knew him.
Now,
But this is about.
yeah. I tell him to read that song. Jesus. No, read the book. Yeah, I don't want to. I just saw that and I thought, that title is so good. It did? And I like it. Where did you go?
Sorry, everybody.
Did you sleep in?
No, I'm in the middle of moving offices, and this is this is not even my office, and so I had to the plug-in in my new office isn't working. So
I like your stripy chairs, very stylish.
well, these aren't mine. This is not my office.
It is somewhere.
Mine's across the hall. They're still moving things into it. So,
Look at me and Corey up at the crack of dawn out in the west. Hi, Corey.
Well, you know, I can't believe that I used to stay up all night at this conference and then attend these early panels. I feel like I need to get like reps socializing, you know, back in my life so that I could do it again.
Mm-hmm. Did you watch the Habs last night?
No, I didn't. I went and
Did
did some
anybody watch
fishing
the Habs?
instead, but I'm definitely going to watch the final now.
Yeah, holy cow, hey?
Corey,
Yes.
can I make you host real quick so you can let people in?
Okay.
That's all you gotta do. Just put it mid.
Jeremy, you know anything yet?
It's a negative. I'll talk to you. It's really weird. I'll talk to you about it later. it's, a, it's a
Sorry.
weird, it's a weird situation right now.
I'm sorry, maybe.
All right.
I was wondering, who's the host?
Love that Arsenal shirt, Phil. Oh, to be a Guna.
You're not driving today, David?
Thank God, no. No.
That was heroic to call in while you're driving.
Well, it was just as heroic of my family to listen the entire time.
Oh, yes, more heroic, actually.
It's all good.
Where were you
75 miles
driving
an hour.
from and to?
I have a home up in the Mohawk Valley, and my office is in Dobbs Ferry, just a few miles north of Manhattan. So I'm
Very
actually in my
nice.
office right now. No, it's okay. But yeah, my daughter graduates high school tomorrow, so we had to come
Oh,
downstate. Yeah.
Are they able to have a real graduation?
Yeah, no masks or anything.
Oh, good.
As you saw,
Good.
the cleaning person just came in wearing a mask, but we don't have to now. So
Excellent.
yeah, it'll be good.
Did anybody hear if the riot in Montreal last night got out of hand, or was it contained? I went to bed just as there was a police car being rolled over.
Oh wow.
Nobody
Yeah,
heard.
what I saw on the news this morning was they rolled a couple of cop cars, but it didn't get out of hand much more than that. If you can call that not getting out of hand.
Yeah. It was crazy though, the footage of how many people were packed into the street. Oh, recipe for disaster. And a lot, I guess, to get into the pubs, you had to hold your seat by 2, and the game didn't start till 8. So there had been people sitting in pubs drinking for 8 hours by the time it was over.
Did the Habs win or
Longer.
lose?
They won. They won. They're going to the Stanley Cup final, which is shocking. Not to my husband, mind you, but shocking to me. He knew they could do it the whole time.
I'm just surprised a Canadian team made the playoffs.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Oh, it's partly the structure of the playoffs this year.
Yeah.
honestly. We had a half a dozen Canadian teams in the playoffs, but it's because they literally had a whole Canadian division.
That's great. I think it's a good thing. I'm a bitter Rangers fan, so hockey ended a long time ago for me.
I'm just sad for Marc-Andre Fleury. Like, I'm glad it was Lehner in goal
Yeah.
last night. Like, Godspeed to him, but I
Yeah,
wanted Fleury to have another chance.
Yeah, that was a terrible series for him, hey? Ugh. Poor guy.
Yeah, there's nothing more public than getting pulled and not put back in either, though. Like, literally, you screw up and
Well, I'm not.
don't
But,
get started the next game, right?
yeah, the more public thing was that horrible fumble. Like, how right? It'd be embarrassing if you did that in high school when you're making millions of dollars and you're on TV and you do that. It would just be mortifying. Mortifying.
I can't remember who wrote it. It was some comedy writer talked about goalie being like literally the worst job in the world because no other job in the world does when you screw up, does a red light go off and 30,000 people boo you. Right?
Yeah.
Did anybody see the own goal scored by a goalie in the European Championships a couple days ago?
They
He
showed that after.
He literally tipped it in, right? Instead of tipping it over, he tipped it into under the bar.
They showed that right after Fleury's fumble because the two were.
30,000 fans watching that.
Yeah.
Yes, they showed it right after the Fleury goal. They were showing clips of it because the two were similar. It was just
Right.
bad.
So in a non-Zoom version of this conference, this would be the hangover day, right? Three days into the conference, after being out at night. That's my memory of those days anyway.
We would have all been out watching hockey, apparently.
That would have been fun. Ron, are those your students reading today, the poetry reading?
No.
No,
Who are they?
I don't know. Fred will know, or someone will know. Fred, do you know who's where?
I have a vague sense of it. It's the person who's being the moderator for their own little session, Jaffer Thomas. It's her students.
Yeah.
Grace, you got any more on her? Yeah, I got sent a little introduction for her, and she's basically going to take over that little section.
That's, California, right?
Yeah.
Cal Poly. Yeah.
But they haven't been to any of the other sessions. Andy, you're up first. Are you nervous?
Hi, how are you? No, I don't think so. Perhaps I should be.
Excited, not nervous.
Just looking, how do we share our screens? Because I can't do so at the moment. Who's organising the Zoom?
Well, it's technically Jeremy, but he's shared hosting with Corey, but I doubt Corey can do anything about that.
Can anyone else share this screen? Because
I can. I have a share screen button. Oh no, it said host disabled participant
Yeah.
screen sharing. You should be able to fix that, Corey.
Yeah, so if I want to make somebody be able to screen share, do I just make them a host?
That's the solution we had at the hockey
That's one way of
conference.
doing it.
No, you want to, Corey, you want to click that everyone can share, and that way you don't have to change the host every time you have a presenter.
Yeah, maybe try right-clicking on screen share and see if there's options or something.
Oh, that's a good idea.
As long as we all agree
Where
not
that
to sort of
setting
on
is,
other
Phil?
people's.
I don't use
It's-
Zoom a whole lot.
There should be like a caret that on the share screen button. There's a caret. If it's not there, then you need to get Jeremy back on to allow everybody to share.
Oh, wait. All right, all participants should be able to share now.
All right. Then we should be good. As long as we agree not to share when it's not our turn.
Good work, Corey.
Yeah, I'm trusting you all to play nice.
Looks like we can now do it. Yeah, well done. Thank you. Well done, Phil. See, you've got the same mug as I've got in my cupboard. Yeah.
I hope they have a better season next year.
Yeah, well, I hope that most years these days, but yeah, it's.
At least they had a season.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it could have been worse. So yeah, it was an odd season, as it has been everywhere, but the football was played and there was a lot of football on television, so it was something to keep us going.
Right.
Yeah, so and England have got the old foe next Tuesday evening.
Right.
Yeah, got to take on Germany again. heartbreak all over is the usual result.
Well, Germany's beatable this year.
Without a doubt,
Depends
but
if
they
it
keep
goes to
finding ways,
penalty.
don't they? Yeah.
Depends if it goes to penalties. That's when
gonna
everyone
say,
in
it's going
England
to
goes, oh God, yeah.
It'll go to penalties.
Yeah. Going to penalties is the oh dear. Anyway, it'll be a good day, I think.
Andy, I'm Ron Smith. Hi. Are you in Swansea right now?
No, I'm in London. I'm at home in London.
Huh.
So yeah, how are you?
Yeah, great. You grew up in Swansea? Do you have a strong connection?
No, I just work in Swansea. I don't really have a connection there at all, apart from work. But and since COVID started, I've only been there 2 or 3 times in over a year. So, but I've just stayed at home in London.
Wait, so Andy,
do you commute?
Well, I did before COVID. Since COVID, I haven't had to.
Right.
What's that, 3 hours? 4 hours?
4 hours. Yeah. It's a long way, but it's okay. I mean, I you know, it's one of those academic jobs which only require me to be there when I have to be there, rather than any other time. So it's manageable. And I like the difference. I know, it's great living in London, but then it's great to go somewhere completely different at times. So yeah, works. Well, I could do without the commute because it's 4 hours, but it's if I could just be transported there, that would be great.
That's wild. I hate commuting, and I don't like commuting when my train ride's 15 minutes. I think that's just too much. I don't know how you do 4 hours.
I mean, when I go, I stay down there, so I get like an apartment or some sort of an Airbnb. But as I said, since March of last year, I think I've only been twice.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I open my back gate and step onto my campus. So that's a lovely commute.
Andy,
Really
Andy, you say you're leaving academia. That doesn't mean you're leaving us, right?
No, I'm just planning on perhaps finishing full-time work in a couple of years' time. That's all. No, I still intend to pursue the things that interest me. And this is one of them.
All right, so we're set to start in a minute. Fred, is there any official welcoming that we're doing?
So I can do it. Hello, welcome. Day 3. We've got certainly this. I think this is our busiest day of all of them on the schedule for things that are going on all day. So hang in there. I will put in another plug for the business meeting. I know sometimes a lot of people, especially new people, think, oh, I have no place there or whatever. Please do attend. Everybody is welcome, and we welcome the contributions of everybody on that. Otherwise, I'm just going to turn it back to you there, Corey, my friend, and you take over.
All right, thank you, Fred. So welcome everybody, like Fred said, to day 3. Coming to you with an all-star lineup of panelists. And I'll just introduce them sort of one at a time as they're going to present, just to, fill that transitional space as they screen share and things like that. So our panel is called Wickets, Wrestling, and Wolves. As a fan of alliteration, I'm happy to be chairing this panel for that reason as well. So first up, we do have Andy Harvey coming to us from Swansea University. And so Andy, oh, excellent. Screen sharing is working, so I'm going to shut up now.
Okay, let me try to organize this. Okay, well, first of all, thank you very much for having me and for accepting a paper. It's lovely to be back with the SLA, and greetings from cloudy and rather wet London. So it's a pleasure to be here. The paper or the text I'm intending to talk about today for a few minutes is called very plainly England, Their England by A.G. MacDonald. So this is the cover of the version that's currently on sale from a very small and publisher. And as you can probably tell from the cover sheet that it's going to be a sort of a tale of prelapsarian, bucolic, idyllic England, a quintessentially English scene there of village cricket and a rather overgrown outfield with poppies and violets growing. And I think the cover sort of perhaps gives an indication of perhaps where we're going with the text. But what about A.G. MacDonald, the author himself? Probably someone who's not particularly well known now, although in his day he was very popular. And in fact, England, Their England won literary prizes in the 1930s. And MacDonald himself, as an author, published 11 to 12 texts, mostly satirical novels, but also some military texts as well. As I said, he was, in between the wars, a popular author, although he has fallen out of fashion somewhat today. In fact, I'd say he's fallen completely out of fashion today, and the texts are not particularly easy to come by, except via a small specialist publisher. So who was he? Sort of rather austere-looking, smart gentleman on the left-hand side. With Archibald Archie Gordon MacDonald, born November 1895 in Pune, India, into a middle-class Scottish merchant family. So he was, in that sense, a child of the British Empire, but he left India very early in life and returned to the UK. And he was educated in England at Winchester College, one of the major public schools, which is the way of saying a private school in England, Winchester College in the south. But importantly, he was a scholarship boy, which meant that his fees were paid for through his academic talent rather than through his family wealth. And I think that's important because generally scholarship boys were looked down upon by their more wealthy peers, and their time at the public schools not necessarily a happy one. And I think that formation experience shines through in MacDonald's work, which primarily satires about the English. Like many young men of his time, he fought on the Western Front in World War I as a second lieutenant in the 51st Highland Division. And like many, perhaps he was fortunate enough during the Spring Offensive of 1918, he was invalided back to England and diagnosed with shell shock. So his experience of World War I was obviously a common one, but he was at least fortunate to survive it. After a brief public sector career, including working in the political sphere and the League of Nations, he turned his hand to writing and became a novelist. And he published a number of novels, but England, Their England, published in 1933, cemented his reputation as a skilled satirist, but especially of English manners and customs. It is probably true to say it's the text which for Hitchens still remembered. Perhaps an interesting vignette about MacDonald's satirical novels is that apparently they were read by Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propagandist minister, who appears to have taken perhaps an over-literal interpretation of them in respect of their portrayals of English aristocracy, upper class, and who believe that they showed a rather dissolute nation, which wouldn't be too difficult to defeat in war. And what about the source of the title, England, Their England? It can be probably traced back to two texts. The first one being the jingoistic poem Pro Rege Nostro by William Ernest Henley, who wrote poems pretty much in the style of Kipling wrote novels, or rather, it's a jingoistic, nationalistic fervor. And his poem Pro Rege Nostro became popular during World War I amongst troops, contains the lines, "What have I done for you, England, my England? What is there I would not do, England, my own?" And it kind of continues in that vein, throughout the poem. And D.H. Lawrence also used the same title, his short story, England, My England, published in 1922. So it's thought that that MacDonald took his text, obviously adapting it to England, their England, from these two sources. So what's the text all about? Well, first of all, it is a roman à clef, and it's set in the 1920s, and it takes the form of a travel memoir through England by a young Scotsman who in the text is known as Donald Cameron, and who has been invalided away from the Western Front. So immediately we can see here that it's probably going to have something of the autobiography about it. He writes for a series of non-London newspapers before being commissioned by a Welshman he happened to meet in the trenches on the Western Front during the war, to write a book about the English from the view of a foreigner. And I think this is one of the aspects that makes it interesting. We're going to get a text, a novel that is from the viewpoint of at least a close neighbour. So taken to the country and provincial cities, Donald spends his time doing research for a book on the English by consorting with journalists and minor poets. He attends a country house weekend, drunken aristocracy, where in fact during the weekend he's mistaken for a football centre forward. He serves the private secretary to a member of parliament, attends the League of Nations, and critically watches and plays several sports. So we can see here that to a large extent that the novel is a thinly disguised autobiography, perhaps of MacDonald's own experiences of living and working in England. One of the perhaps the fun aspects of a roman à clef is to try to identify the real people behind the characters. Not be able to do that to any large extent, because I think at least to an extent they're lost in the mists of time. The text has not been subject to a great deal of critical scrutiny or commentary, perhaps rely on the fact that it is a fairly slight comedy. But Donald Cameron, the protagonist, is obviously A.G. MacDonald himself, the author. Lady Ormerode, one of the first characters that we meet, is thought to be Nancy Astor, the Anglo-American who was also the first woman member of Parliament. So an important sort of like character in between the wars, in the political sphere. Ormerode Towers, where Cameron spends a drunken weekend amongst the English aristocracy and upper middle classes, is thought to be Cliveden, but A.G. MacDonald does not make mention of the fact that Cliveden and the Cliveden set were the home of the pro-Nazi sympathisers within the English aristocracy, which of course is the subject matter of Ishiguro's The Remains of the Day, and the film with Anthony Hopkins and so on. Bring it more back to sort of the purpose which I was reading the text. William Hodge, who is a newspaper editor, is thought to be Sir John Squire, the poet and editor of the London Mercury, which published poems and critical pieces. And somewhat to Cameron's surprise, amongst the poems and critical literary pieces, also descriptions of numerous sports events, showing how sport and the English obsession with sports was very much tied up, I think, with sort of the literary set as well. Bobby Southcote, who we will see is an able cricketer, is thought to be Alec Waugh, the author of The Loom of Youth and the brother, of course, of Evelyn Waugh of Brideshead Revisited and Scoop fame. Of course, it was in The Loom of Youth that Alec Waugh perhaps exploded or revealed as fiction the idea that team sports in the public schools were somehow designed to produce a red-blooded heteronormative masculinity and to ward off the perils of sexual desire, when in The Loom of Youth, Alec Waugh revealed that in fact the most able athletes during the day were also the most enthusiastic nocturnal gymnasts, thus explaining that particular sort of like a myth held by Victorian and Edwardian schoolmasters in particular. And perhaps a character that we only meet very briefly, but only described as the cricketer in the blue jumper, who MacDonald describes as being rather effeminate when first met at Charing Cross Station on their way to the game in Kent, is thought to be Noel Coward, the famous playwright. There's been quite a lot about Noel Coward recently. There's been a set of photographs, private photographs that have just come to public light that shows how Noel Coward, although he never acknowledged publicly the fact that he was gay or homosexual in the terminology that would have been used at the time, in fact led privately a very open life, despite the risks that were involved. And there's a new exhibition about Noel Coward on as well now, which again sort of at least explores in part the fact that Noel Coward wasn't just sort of like the sort of dandy in the dressing gown, but in fact had a much richer cultural life than had perhaps previously been thought, or at least that has come down to us since his death. So there are at least some of the people behind the characters. It would be, of course, be interesting to find out more, but as I said, I think to a certain extent they may well be lost. What about the place of sport in the novel? Well, I think one of the critical aspects of this is just how, from the eyes of an outsider, i.e. of a Scotsman living and working in London, is just how fully integrated sport is within English society, at least within upper middle class society, but also amongst sort of working classes as well. And in many respects, the novel reinforces our stereotypes, I think, of both class relations and indeed of sport, and doesn't do a great deal to critique them. So association football, otherwise known in other parts of the world as soccer, but here as football, is portrayed very much as the game of the working classes, and a game that Cameron goes to watch at Craven Cottage, the home of Fulham, is described as a sort of seething mass of cloth-capped men who go to watch their team on a Saturday afternoon. Similarly, with rugby, the game that Cameron goes to watch is the Oxford-Cambridge varsity match, which attracts a huge audience, a huge spectatorship of 50 or 60,000 people. And again, rather stereotypically, no one really cares too much about the result. In fact, humorously, no one actually remembers the result. It was just about the way the game was played, and the fact that it was just a sort of great social occasion, rather than necessarily the fact that it was played for winning or losing. And in fact, the game was reported as ending in a draw. Cameron also plays golf, Scotland's national game, and perhaps not surprisingly, MacDonald ensures that Cameron is by far the best player amongst his English hosts, and wins a substantial amount of money from them by beating them at the game of golf. Cricket, of course, is portrayed as the national game of England and is the centerpiece of the novel, and it's often cited as the chief reason for why we still remember quite a lengthy chapter is dedicated to cricket and the game and the village cricket match. And finally, Cameron is involved, or at least goes to watch fox hunting, England's rural sport, and again, in doing so, the idea being that he's able to find out something about the English national character from watching and participating in all these sporting activities. So the village cricket match, as I said, is probably the most fondly remembered chapter and incident. It's a representation of Sir John Squire's cricket clubs, the Invalids, cricket club set up after the First World War, and the name is suggestive of the fact that, again, it was to attract those, particularly soldiers who had been invalided out of the war. But interestingly, importantly, it still plays today. You can still go on the web, on the internet, and you can find the Invalids Cricket Club, just still a touring team, a peripatetic touring team that still plays today, and is has been in existence ever since, just after the First World War. The game is portrayed as this quintessential English sporting pastime. and is a celebration of amateur participation in sport. And because nobody's any good at it, I mean, it's one of the sort of strange and oddities, I think, of perhaps British sporting participation, of which I'm a fully paid up member, that none of us have to be any good at it to be able to take part. We still do so, or at least in my case did so. And I think that this aspect of English sport is still true today. If you know, walk around on a Saturday afternoon, you'll still see and still find cricket clubs playing their 40-over games, not particularly well, but you know, who cares? It's the participation, it's the amateur participation, and of course the social aspect of it. The portrayal also, you know, reinforces stereotype class distinctions. So that the village blacksmith, who plays for the Thornton team, who's a John Squires cricket club that have gone to play, is Thornton's fast bowler, against the very stereotypical idea that, you know, that the working classes made up the sort of bowlers, rather upper middle classes, you know, sort of stroke the ball about, you know, elegantly with their skilled batsmanship. And the game is played in these bucolic pre-lapsarian surroundings with as much emphasis on the pub as the cricket. Again, you know, it's almost rude and un-English to sort of suggest that there would be much by way of sort of like actual competition. And not surprisingly, in the game ends in a state of confusion with a ball being struck high into the air, and eventually, after 2 or 3 pages of reasonably sort of like humorous writing, is eventually caught, in fact, by a guest American. I've just forgot his name, Jackson Pollock. I'm going to say, but it's not. But it's something like that. And the game ends in a tie. So once again, you know, and no one wins. And this might be again sort of some sort of like, you know, commentary on the English that you know, winning and losing is somehow bad form. You know, so every game that and every sport that Cameron takes part in seems to end in a draw or a tie. So what themes are there? Well, the themes are social class. And so while some of MacDonald's other novels offered a more biting satire of the English upper classes, England's a more affectionate satirical text. And sport is seen as firmly seen as reinforcing social divisions. You know, there's very little in the text that questions or problematizes what I think are sort of fairly stereotypical portrayals of English society between the wars. Not surprisingly, given the time period, nationalism is a major theme, and the fact that sport, and particularly amateur sports, is fully integrated within the idea of Englishness, pervading discourses in newspapers and conversation. That sport appears to be this you know, this obsession of English, and not surprisingly, also gender. Sport is very much a male pursuit only, and thereby reinscribing homosocial bonds within society. So very little of the text, I think, despite it being a satire, actually does much to undermine what might be otherwise be thought of being what one might expect from England and English sport between the wars. So while England might be seen as a gentle satire, as one that reinforces stereotypes of the nation, MacDonald does little more than shake a bemused head at English eccentricities, the obsession with sports, and the studied amateurism of the upper middle classes. And in fact, my own view is that rather than a satire, it may be better described as a love letter from a near neighbour. You know, the dark underbelly of English society, the class relations, you know, the dalliance with Nazism, for example, is left wholly unexamined. Somewhat oddly, because in some of his other texts, he wrote much more biting satires of the English upper middle classes, perhaps informed by his experiences at Winchester. Is it worth reading? Well, you know, I suppose if anything, it's always worth reading, but I would say it probably remains a curious period piece rather than essential reading. But the portrayal of sport bolsters the case for its gender and social place within English culture between the wars. yeah, I wouldn't say it's especially funny as a text, but on the hand, it did have its moments, and it's a gentle read, perhaps you know, similar to what you might find in with P.G. Wodehouse, for example. So yeah, an enjoyable book, perhaps one that doesn't offer as many insights into into English culture between the walls as one might hope from an outsider's perspective. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it.
All right, thank you, Andy. And we'll just do questions for everybody at the end. So coming up next, we have my fellow Canadian, Adrian Markle, coming to us from Falmouth University.
Yeah, thank you. So what I'm going to be reading today is the, I guess, Reader's Digest, abridged version of the chapter that I wrote for Angie and Jamie's sort of next upcoming critical anthology, Writing Wild, Countercultures, Extreme Sport, and the Canadian Novel. As usual, I've got a lot of quotes in here from the book, which I have not signposted super effectively. So if I say something that sounds questionable, assume that it's a quote. And if I say something that sounds good, assume that it was me. I think that's probably the best way to do this moving forward. Anyway, here we go. From the Wrong Side of the Tracks, The Boxer and Society in Stephen Heighton's The Shadow Boxer. I don't have a PowerPoint, by the way. I wasn't sure I would be able to get it working, and I thought I would spare everyone and myself the indignity of trying and failing to get it working while you were all waiting. So you just have to listen to me talk for a minute. This is From the Wrong Side of the Tracks, The Body and Society in Stephen Heighton's The Shadow Boxer. Stephen Heighton's modern Canlit classic, The Shadow Boxer, is about Sabine Torrens, a boy who grew up in a working class family in Sault Ste. Marie, or the Sioux, a Northern Ontario industrial city on the decline. But Sabine dreams of a different life than the one most people find there. He wants to be a writer, and on his journey toward that goal, he travels from the Sioux to upper-class Bohemian Toronto, and finally to the harsh and Spartan Rye Island in Lake Superior. In addition to being a writer, Sabine is also a boxer. Boxing is so closely tied to poverty that it is emblematic of it, and in Heighton's novel, Sabine's boxing, as symbol of his lower-class upbringing, actually impedes his progress towards writing success. Not in an immediate way, as in he doesn't skip a meeting with an agent to find a fight in a tournament at the rec center, for instance, but in a universal way. Sabine's class background, which is symbolized by his fighting is a term used here interchangeably with boxing and pugilism, just so as not to exhaust you, prevents him from truly succeeding within the writing class. Sabine's twin pursuits of writing and boxing occupy the shared space of his life, although one is seemingly repelled by the other, like oil sheening on the rough waters of Lake Superior. If you want to know who's at the bottom of society, all you got to do is look who's boxing, says Dee Dee Armour, boxing coach at the Woodlawn Boys Club in Chicago, as quoted by sociologist Local Kant. Indeed, the majority of boxers come from the working class. It makes sense, of course. Who else would do it? Boxers, at least the type who are serious enough about the sport to become competitive, must maintain a sometimes monastic lifestyle and endure numerous injuries and ailments for a diminishing chance to earn from a diminishing prize pool. It is only the poor, those without many other economic opportunities, for whom that would be a reasonable investment of their time and health. Boxing, as a pursuit, is intrinsically tied to lower class poverty. While there are certainly boxers both in life and in literature who come from the upper class, they are exceptions. Sabine grew up in the Sioux, which is squalid and full of dirt and leaves and thawing dog shit in the spring. And as an adult, he drives a rotting Pontiac sedan with a prolapsed muffler past those slumped, wobbling derelicts who swilled Listermint or Sterno or Aqua Velva to his low-paying job so he can earn skimpy tips and paychecks to make up for the shortfall when his father's pension money wasn't enough for the booze. Sabine is clearly not one of those rare upper-class exceptions. However, Savine's low-class origins are not something he can simply leave behind when he moves to Toronto. As Gavin Jones says, poverty becomes a trait of identity, with class status coming to seem natural rather than contingent. Poverty, he continues, results in lasting behavioral patterns. So poverty is more than simply a backdrop. It is a fundamental part of who Savine is, and the same is true for boxing. However, simply because boxing is intrinsically identified with poverty, this does not mean that all those in lower class environments appreciate boxing. It is an activity that is ill regarded by many. Even within the social class that is most likely to appreciate it. Savine starts properly training and competing in high school with the school's boxing club. Once he is fighting, the aspiring artists and songwriters who had become his friends deride his decision, claiming that Eastern martial arts like karate may somehow be different or mystical or art, but boxing is, quote, primitive scum culture. Savine immediately understands that this judgment is about class. Boxing lived on the wrong side of the tracks. His friends might also be from that side of the tracks, but they hope one day to cross them. They aspire to more high-minded pursuits, and boxing appears incompatible with those. The boxer's identity is tied to his body. He is a body person, as Jamie calls it, drawing a distinction between the body and mind. Leger-Grandin notes that the boxer specifically personifies the division between body and spirit. Grandin uses the word spirit, but elsewhere in the article, he refers to the same mind-body split. Spirit in this context refers to anything beyond the body. There is a separation or even conflict between the life of the body of boxers and the life of the mind of writers and intellectuals. Jean Carlos Rowe says, the traditionally defined proletariat is defined less by the theft of its physical power, labor power per se, than by exclusion from the diverse media through which the economy produces its effects. Media, which includes literature, has long been a vehicle for the production of social consensus, and as such has also long been primarily limited to those from the appropriate social stratus. So while Savine may share the traditionally bourgeois fetishization of the novel, there are significant cultural barriers to his involving himself in, let alone seizing, the production of such a text. As, quote, the exploitation of the postmodern working class begins with his exclusion from that media. Gavin Jones makes a similar observation about the way in which poverty might exclude the lower class from engaging in activities with high cultural capital, though his explanation is more internal. He says that hunger, by which he means the desire that constitutes the human subject, is in its extremes able to destroy the intellectual self-consciousness of the poor, thus cutting them off entirely from the realm of literate culture. So Savine may never truly become a part of that writing class, as his background of poverty, embodied by his pugilism, is a fundamental element, not elephant at all, of his identity, and as such will always remain a barrier. The barrier may not always, or even often, be a literal one, but it is always present in a subtle, universal way. Heighton reveals the origins of literature and fighting in Savine's life as being intertwined, perhaps giving truth to Savine's claims of a poem and a fight being made of the same energy. Savine, as a kid, began tearing through books at a rate of 1 or 2 a day, though this was cause enough for the other students in the school to begin to beat him up, which in turn inspired him to learn to fight back, thus putting violence and literature in opposition to each other from the outset. After physically defending his reading habits, Savine also begins to fill dime store notebooks with poems and stories of his own. So the intertwined origins of boxing and literature in Savine's life might give the impression that they are complementary, but they do not function that way. Though they are both central to Savine's life, engagement with boxing or fighting regularly corresponds to diminished engagement or success in writing or upper-class cultural activity. Savine boxes and writes through high school, but the writing clearly takes a backseat. He manages rarely to do more than dash urgent stanzas on the end papers of his books, demonstrating that while he is writing during this time, his writing is the result of occasional inspiration rather than dedicated time or effort. This balance remains true through his graduation. Savine's focus on fighting comes at the expense of his focus on writing until after a brutal bout in the North Ontario finals, when he pitches his bloody hand wraps and shoes and mouthpiece into the trash, symbolizing the end of his competition in boxing. This moment is not the end of his training or sparring or even fighting, as we shall see, but this moment marks the end of his organized competition and opens the door for Savine to begin to see success with his writing, which comes here in the form of an acceptance from the Toronto Poetry Review, approximately a year to the date from his last competition. Shortly after this, Savine writes the first draft of his novel, Islands of the Nile, and moves to Toronto to meet up with some of those same young artists who had been his friends in high school, and to live a bohemian lifestyle of drinking and sex and music while trying to make it as a writer. But Heighton depicts him as being in a steady state of conflict with his environment, though this rarely manifests as anything more than dissatisfaction. Interestingly, Savine is poor in Toronto, living in a cheap bachelor apartment he refers to as a cell for $650 a month inclusive, but he does not, for the majority of his time at least, box or fight. This situation seems to buck the trend of pugilism being an expression of poverty, but on closer examination, that trend is still upheld here because Savine's poverty is voluntary, or even perhaps a facade. Savine has an ample opportunity to make money. He simply chooses not to. He regularly argues with his magazine editor friend about the length of the book reviews he turns in, and therefore does less of them than he could. He then quits a $1 per word job writing book summaries for the type of CD-ROM encyclopedia that were popular at the time. And he takes a job writing lyrics for advertising jingles that would pay him between 8 and 15 grand a year, much more than enough to cover his small bachelor apartment for very little effort or time. And he eventually quits that job too, saying he would hate himself if he continued to do it. So while he does not have much money here, he is neither truly poor, in that he is no poorer than he would like to be at any given moment, nor is the community he is a part of, which, by being populated with artists, is one of high cultural capital and high potential monetary capital. After having been away from the working class long enough, Savine finally gets some good news regarding Islands of the Nile. One of Toronto's major publishers announces their plan to partner with a major New York publisher and release his book. He rides the high of that success until one night, when out for dinner with his more successful artist partner, Ike, and her friends, he fights again, defending himself against the thin-skinned former friend, Ray, who has become jealous of Savine's newfound success. Savine leaves Ray, quote, sprawled out on the icy flags while guests look on in wary fascination. Importantly, after Savine fights Ray, he does not rejoin his upper-class partner and colleagues, opting to save them from the, quote, embarrassment that his presence might now cause them. Thus, his fighting here causes a literal departure from this group of upper-class creatives. Heighton represents this return to fighting and departure from upper-class cohort as carrying a karmic or universal significance. As after Savine's return to fighting, he receives notice that his big deal publisher, quote, may have been somewhat prematurely optimistic in contacting him about publishing his novel, and they now have no such plans. So he's fought again, and immediately after he has lost the book, he also, due to his infidelity, loses his girlfriend, after which he retains no sense of belonging in this upper-class environment, which forms what Heighton himself describes as Savine's false life. But what is false about it? Savine shares the same artistic calling and sensibilities as Toronto cohort, and many of them come from the same socioeconomic background as he does without similarly feeling false in their lives. The falsity is that Savine still has boxing, and through boxing, an interiorized working class poverty as a core element of his identity. Therefore, any life he would build within this extravagant upper class Toronto would be incompatible with his essential sense of self. So when Savine leaves Toronto and quits his jingle writing job, he says that he'd hate himself if he continued to do such work. Hate himself more than he already does, he adds, demonstrating the depressed self-loathing that he feels before he sets off to Rye Island. In class representations and in modern fiction and film, Keith Gandel discusses how traumatic self-loathing and depression often result in a character degrading his body in narratives about poverty, an observation relevant to the events that soon play out for Savine. Rye Island and its harsh ascetic lifestyle will remove Savine from the Toronto culture that he never felt a part of, will allow him the time to do nothing but finish his novel, and will allow him to punish himself, and thus perhaps atone for his infidelity. He arranges to have himself dropped there in the summer, to be retrieved in the spring, and to be occasionally resupplied in the meantime. He will be the lone occupant on the island, living in an old bootlegging shack with historical significance to his family. To fill his days, he swims if the weather will allow it. He listens to the battery-powered radio. He drinks moonshine he finds hidden in the shack from an earlier age. He edits and rewrites Islands of the Nile, but he does not seem to have changed much. He still feels jealous when he hears of success of others on the radio, for instance. What eventually does lead to Sabine change is that he gets, quote, frostbite on his trigger finger and the pinky of his right hand. After a week of increasing infection and pain, he takes out a hunting knife and sets the blade to the very base of the pinky and begins to cut, leaving his pinky lying on the log like nothing remotely human. Gendel says that the desecrated body is a central image of narratives about masculinity and poverty, and that decay is meant to be purifying, and that identification is meant to be transcendent. Identification with the degraded, is meant to be transcendent. Heighton depicts Sabine here as degraded by describing a former part of his body as nothing remotely human. Gendel then goes on to say that these narratives deliver their protagonists from the bohemian depths, with a death or a symbolic death near the end. Sabine, after losing his girlfriend, book, and sense of belonging in upper class society, and part of as a result in part of the expression of his lower class upbringing in that false upper class context, journeys to Rye Island. While there, he symbolically destroys his hand, removing what Heighton refers to as the pinky finger of his trigger hand, but which, more importantly, is the pinky finger of his punching hand. All boxers use both hands, of course, but the left hand for an orthodox fighter is primarily for the jab. Some fighters have powerful left hooks, but for those that have that in the toolkit, it becomes the signature punch, the significant and perhaps defining part of their arsenal, and nothing indicates that's the case for Sabine. The right hand is the knockout hand. As boxing is emblematic of the lower class, so too is the right hand emblematic of boxing. The right is the dominant hand, the power hand, the KO hand, and Sabine destroys it. This act is only a symbolic destruction. Of course, it's only one finger, and Sabine eventually is able to return to training, though seemingly with no competitive interest. But even so, this destruction of his fist, the emblem of his lower class upbringing, is what ultimately opens the door to Sabine's end of novel growth. He went through what Gendel refers to as trauma as therapy, a common trope for the emotional development of characters that come from lower class backgrounds, symbolically destroying his identity as a fighter, and by extension, as the possessor of working class anger and identity. As such, when the boat finally comes for him in the spring, he is strong and sane and grateful, and he waits for it on the shore, and he beams with his fists, with his clenched fists uplifted, much more emotionally prepared to function in the world to which he returns. He is calmer and more at peace. He is less inclined to conflict with his surroundings. His family notices, and so does his ex, who considers reuniting with him. His own explanation is that the writing of the novel seems to have exercised his demons, but this proves untrue, as he later explains to a friend that he was writing every day. Same novel, can't seem to finish it. The act of writing the novel is unlikely to be what exercised him, since the process of the writing had begun long before Rye Island and would continue long after it. Similarly, Heighton himself claims that it was failure that was the making of Sabine, but that explanation similarly fails to identify this change in him, as Sabine has failed many times before, in the ring, in love, and on the page. The unique event with the power to exercise his demons was the symbolic destruction of his identity as a working class scrapper. Sabine Torrens was a kid with dreams of a sophisticated life of the mind in the big city, but he was also a working class kid. He's emblematic of the working class. He fights both in the ring and out of it. His fighting is not the cause of his failure to achieve his dreams over the course of the novel, but it is the symbol of his cause, of the cause. His love of boxing is illustrative of his origins in poverty and its influence on his identity. His life of the body will not easily become a life of the mind. His life on the one side of the tracks cannot easily be transplanted to the other. He cannot resolve this conflict until he retreats out of societal class structure, out of society altogether, to Rye Island, and there destroys the symbol of his lower class upbringing, his punching hand. When he returns to civilization, he is more equipped to function in that class context emotionally and intellectually, and perhaps creatively as well. The end.
All right, thank you, Adrian. So next up, we'll have David Kilpatrick coming to us via Mercy College. So take it away, David.
Thank you. Get the PowerPoint up here. I think. There we go. There we go. Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And thank you for this opportunity to once again address the members of the Sport Literature Association. Today, I'm delighted to share with you my engagement with what might be the most significant work of sport literature to appear in the last 5 years, The Wolves by Sarah DeLapp. My presentation will explore how staging and studying the play provides a unique case study that reveals core thematic concerns at the intersections of sport, literature, pedagogy, and performance. As Richard Oman has traced the processes of canon formation for contemporary US fiction from 1960 to 75, Sarah DeLapp's play is an excellent example of how a new play can still score big with contemporary audiences. Acing the Bechdel test with an all-female cast of 10, the play depicts an elite suburban indoor soccer team of 9, 16, and 17-year-old girls, plus one soccer mom. The play features overlapping dialogue in the style refined by Carol Churchill, beginning with her work with Max Stafford Clark and the Joint Stock Company at London's Royal Court in the late 1970s. But with the added dimension of sport, the challenge of speech while being physically active, as the players warm up in each of the 6 scenes, which correspond with weekly Saturday games the team plays over a winter, the soccer mom appearing with a monologue at the end of the play, at a domed sportsplex. Then a 20-something MFA student at Brooklyn College, Sarah DeLapp's play was selected by blind jury from among 578 submissions as one of 5 main staged readings for the May 2015 Great Plains Theater Conference in Omaha, Nebraska, kicking off the annual Festival of New Writing at 10 a.m. that May 28th. Under the direction of Lila Neugebauer, Playwrights Horizons Theater School and Club Thumb Workshop staged the play from September 7th through 11th, 2015 at the Robert Moss Theater on Lafayette Street. In November 2015, the play was the co-winner of the inaugural Relentless Award, launched by the American Playwriting Foundation in honor of the memory of Philip Seymour Hoffman, which earned DeLapp a split of the $45,000 prize and a week-long production retreat in upstate New York. Workshopped for a full stage production at Vassar College as a New York stage and film production, where the director, Neugebauer, an accomplished youth and scholastic soccer player herself, ran her cast through extensive soccer training for a fully staged production from July 21st to the 31st, 2016 at the Powerhouse Theater in Poughkeepsie. The Wolves finally made its professional off-Broadway debut in a Playwrights Realm production at the Duke on 42nd at Times Square, running from August 29th to September 24th, 2016, and again from November 29th to December 29th, 2016. Ben Brantley gushed over the play in the September 11th, 2016 New York Times, and soon the Village Voice, Variety, New York, and other sources of theater criticism were joining in unanimous praise for the Wolves. With these accolades, DeLapp began to imagine the possibility of the play being produced without her direct involvement. Quote, "I'd love to see the Wolves in high schools, colleges, community theaters, all over the world," she told Brandon Stosey for the Creative Independent. "You don't need much to do it, just 10 women and some turf." Later that year, it was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. And then the production ran again at Lincoln Center's Newhouse Theater from November 1st, 2017 to January 7, 2018. And then DeLapp's wish for the play quickly became reality, going viral, if it's okay to still use that term, on English language stages worldwide, making its European debut at London's Theatre Royal Stratford East, from the 24th of October to 17 November 2018. And then suddenly productions proliferated. This is not a complete or exhaustive list, but you can see how it just started to explode, especially on university campuses in 2018, especially 2019, 2020. Rider College, if anybody knows, I think that performance was canceled. And then the Philadelphia Theater Company actually tried streaming it in 2020. And that was then done this year at Rowan, Emporia, Seton Hill, and probably some other places. There are no signs of letting up, with numerous productions scheduled for staging later this year. 25 are licensed to be produced in the United States, and another 4, Melbourne, London, Mexico City, and Tel Aviv, are licensed to be produced later this year worldwide. So if The Wolves hasn't been staged at your campus or in your local community, there's a safe bet that soon it will. An even safer bet, even better bet, is the next paper by Philip Wedge will examine this play too. Surely there haven't been many soccer plays, barely 5 years old, receiving attention with 2 presentations at the same SLA conference. The play is significant. What does it signify and how? Amidst this well-deserved hype, Rob McIntosh, a teacher at New York City's Repertory Company High School for Theater Arts, decided to stage a production with his advanced acting class as a showcase for female students in the class of 2020. Given the demands for soccer technique, McIntosh posted a call for help on Facebook, answered by a high school friend of his, David Ziegler. Phil, you might appreciate this, a fellow Arsenal America board member. Ziegler suggested me. Having just finished the season coaching my daughter's 16 and under team for Sleepy Hollow FC, that's her right there. She graduates high school tomorrow. If positionality determines epistemology, I felt ideally suited for a dramaturgical coaching role for the production. We quickly negotiated and scheduled 6 visits to help his student actors learn to play like soccer players. Aware as I was of the play's growing reputation, I must confess I missed attending any of the numerous local performances of the original production. So I ordered a copy of the script as published by Overlook in 2018, not the Samuel French acting edition I would later learn that director and actors were using, and quickly became concerned over the script's demands for movement. Having adopted dynamic warm-up methods in 2006 as a coach, I was appalled at the very start of the play to see players static stretching in unison, with the exception of newcomer number 46, who learns their routine through the course of the play. No coach appears on stage in the play. Instead, number 25, players don't have names in the play, they just have numbers. Number 25 assumes a leadership role, directing them through this pregame ritual, which does include some dynamic actions in scene 3. When she commands them to grapevine, I was lost as to what that might mean. Later that scene, number 46 intercepts a pass between players and begins to juggle. I was told the actor already assigned that role was the only member of the cast with any soccer playing experience. But how reliably could she execute this show of skill? Moments later in the play, the sole player who threatens number 25's authority, number 7, gets 5 of her teammates to join her in a drill they call the spider web. Were the grapevine and spider web names for drills or activities I already knew, or were they something new to me? Week 3 dialogue dictates movement, but what specific movement does it intend, reference, or require? Any reader may easily imagine the lap soccer dramaturgy, but any staging of the Wolves must incorporate movement or physical dramaturgy. For if the beautiful game is to be mimicked or represented with any sense of verisimilitude, it must be done as dance. I hope you don't find it unsporting of me that I decided to cheat and booked a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to watch a video at the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts Theater on Film and Tape Archive at Lincoln Center of the original production. It was filming of the 23rd of September 2016 performance at the Duke on 42nd Street. Under Neugebauer's direction, the static warm-up was complicated and elaborate. These are my notes that I took at the archive. The grapevine is what I'm used to calling karaoke. Number 46 did not juggle the ball in that production. Instead, she drags the ball back and forth from left foot to right foot with toe taps and drag backs. And the spider web is a technical passing, receiving, and movement activity I had never seen before. Its complexity difficult to represent graphically, perhaps best done so from the perspective of the first player that begins the routine. So you see in this graphic that I made, player 11 begins this with a pass across to number 2. She runs out to the center of the circle, receives a pass here from player number 13, then passes the ball over to number 13. The line.
You're frozen.
Then needed to be made. Fidelity to the script does not necessarily mandate copying movements from another production, even if it is the original. Then I realized the question of what they do and how they do it is, of course, a question of staging. But the question of how they learned to do what they do and who they learned it from is itself the question concerning coaching, which may too often and all too easily do more harm than good. It is not simply a matter of opsis mise en scène. It is also a matter of dianoia, an essential thematic concern of the play. In week 3, number 7 questions not warming up properly. Quote, "We're not going to stretch?" "No time," says 25. Hello, that is like so fucking dangerous. Number 7 responds, and this changes number 25's mind, who then commands a quick pregame stretch. This seems like foreshadowing when number 7 arrives for week 4 on crutches with a boot cast for a torn ACL. This provides an opportunity for number 46 to take number 7's role as striker and ultimately reveals herself as a diamond in the rough, which finally allows for her group acceptance. Number 14 blames number 7 for skiing on a sprained ankle, but this of course begs the question if this is an example of overuse or a consequence of inappropriate preparation, as number 7 had feared. Among female soccer players, who are 4 to 8 times as likely to suffer the injury as their male counterparts. U.S. Youth Soccer cautions against using the high knee technique in agility drills, precisely what number 25 demands with her opening words for week 3. High knees! While her control and manipulation of number 14 results in tragic consequences, making her arguably the villain of the play, from this perspective, number 7 is, at least physically, a victim of bad coaching. If the methods used in the original production are what I would not use coaching, even if I thought they were wrong to the point of potential physical harm, what should I teach or coach the cast? Avoiding what I view as improper coaching methodology would filter the play. Correcting what is incorrect would itself be incorrect, although this is not a matter of submission to some sense of authorial intention. So as I taught the cast/team the movements they would need to execute, I also told them how the methods differ from what I have learned and why I think they are wrong, beginning with our initial meeting at the school's black box, where the play was rehearsed and performed. Rather than replicate the complex stretching technique routine I implemented, a simplified static stretching sequence I often use as a cool down. At the end of training. Although the actor playing number 46 wanted to juggle the ball on stage, it was clear it might easily cause a threat to the audience if she lost control. You can just imagine somebody juggling the ball, losing control, and smack somebody in the face. Suddenly there's a lawsuit, right? The author's notes to the acting edition support this decision, saying, quote, "It ought to be an impressive show of ball handling skill." It was. Only a reader of the play would think they had missed something. The school above town hall does not have athletic facilities. So we ran training twice in Central Park. Here I am with some of the cast there. Although the entire cast could not make these after-school rehearsals, they were effective for establishing muscle memory for the required movements and allowed us to scrimmage, which fostered a sense of team spirit, allowing us to shout, "We are the Wolves," as tourists watch. There you can see I'm actually showing them the high knees that US Youth Soccer says you really shouldn't do. The 6 meetings with the cast may not have been enough to make the team ready for competition, but it was enough to make them ready for theatrical performance. In addition to movement dramaturgy, I helped the director with costuming and props, identifying a soccer supplier who could provide appropriately numbered uniforms and balls. I also lent them additional equipment such as player bags, cones, and goalkeeper gloves. My offers of traditional textual dramaturgical help were surprisingly rejected by the cast. When I offered to explain, for instance, allusions to ECNL and ODP, some of the alphabet soup of youth soccer organizations in America, the actor playing number 7 simply said, "That's okay, we just looked that stuff up." So I did not push the issue. They saw me or needed me as a coach, not a literature professor. While the Wolves might easily win any Bechtel test tournament, my own positionality drew me to consider 3 unseen characters who drive the plot. First, good old screamy Coach Frank, father of the captain, number 25, whose leadership likely mimics that of her father. Then, second of all, Coach Neil, their current coach. "Coach couldn't give a shit if we paid him," says number 14. "Oh, that's right, we do," responds number 7. They accuse him of being hungover. They mock him for wearing sunglasses inside, for working at Best Buy, and even mock him for being a war veteran. Scrimmage and sports bras, they allude to. And one player says, "Our parents are paying out the ass for a coach." The third coach that is unseen is their beloved Coach Patrick, who is their second coach, who replaced the father, parent volunteer, but he had to abandon the team to attend to his mother, who's struggling against cancer in Idaho, but comes back for week 6 to give a funeral speech for number 14. 2 other unseen coaches are alluded to: a Texas A&M man in a suit who scouts players in the company of Coach Neil, and another team's Eastern European former pro coach, Mikhail, who some players see as an object of desire, despite assumed wartime violence, in contrast to their current scorned coach, Neil, whom they imagine is guilty of wartime atrocities and who they think sees them as objects of desire. A team going from a volunteer parent coach to a sequence of paid coaches is a familiar pattern in youth soccer. Did Frank teach the girls their stretching ritual? Did Patrick teach them the spider web? Is Neil really a creep? By the way, that's the grapevine, or what I'd call karaoke. Did Neil even need to teach them anything? Or did their parents hire him for his connections with college coaches who might offer them scholarships? According to the NCAA, only 7.2% of girls will make the transition from high school to college soccer, with just 2.4 and 1.9 playing D1 and D2 respectively. And again, if they make it even on a squad, how much playing time do they get? And do they get any of the coveted scholarships that they're after? Perhaps that's Neil's greatest asset to the team, one that they're not really aware of. That the girls have only been coached by men is no surprise to anyone familiar with the US soccer landscape. As James Reed has shown, even with elite women's football, women comprise nearly 20% of the coaches at elite football. And according to the Aspen Institute's 2016 State of Play report, only 27% of youth coaches were female. And soccer ranked last in US. FIFA report, women comprise just 7% of all licensed coaches worldwide. From AYSO courses I have instructed and US soccer courses I have taken, frankly, those numbers seem inflated. Number 25 might well become a coach someday, but without proper training, she will simply mimic the negative methods of those who coached her. The Wolves powerfully depicts the coaching crisis facing US soccer. Here you see how untrained soccer coaches are. The production corresponded with a section of Honors English 2 and a section of Sport and Society that I was teaching spring 2020 here at Mercy College. Core theoretical principles from the latter were applicable for the former, as I chose the Wolves to coincide with the School of Liberal Arts annual theme of Voices. Students All freshmen, so 17 and 18-year-olds, all a year older than the actors and the characters in the play, read the play, then saw the production. Two concepts from sports sociology that were helpful for the college students as they read the play were socialization and the great sport myth. While each of the 9 wolves had their own individual arcs of character development, week to week, as number 46 learns the team's warm-up ritual, she assimilates into the group. But this comes at a cost. Initially an unproven substitute, number 25 would not let her play striker as requested. Number 7's ACL injury opens the starting spot for her, while the death of number 14 unites her with the rest of the team in the bonds of grief. Scene 6 is a death mass at the Sportplex, organized via text by Coach Frank. We are told by Soccer Mom, the mother of the deceased number 14. As number 46 goes from outsider to insider, the play offers an interrogation of the great sport myth, which according to Jay Coakley is the belief that, quote, sport is essentially pure and good, and its purity and goodness are transferred to anyone who plays, consumes, or sponsors sports. Therefore, there is no need to study and evaluate sports for the purpose of transforming or making them better, because they are already what they should be, end quote. Just as the cast of urban aspiring actors were overwhelmingly unfamiliar with soccer, so too the college class of 9 female and 1 male students had little, if any, playing experience or interest in the sport as fans. So I had the same number of female students in the class as there were players in the play. I began discussion of the play by asking students to write answers to the following 4 questions. 1, what do you think of soccer? 2, what do you think of girls who play soccer? 3, what do you think of people who play organized sport? And 4, what do most Americans think of soccer? Read aloud, their responses set the tone for weeks of engagement with the play. One said, quote, my girls' high school team was undefeated, capital letters undefeated, but received almost no recognition, end quote. While another said athletes, quote, are less likely to get caught in the wrong social crowd, end quote. This statement allowed me to introduce this concept of the great sport myth as we explored the Wolves' socialization. The 9 female students attended the performance on Friday, January 31st. The male student in the class didn't show up at the train, didn't show up in Midtown. 5 wrote reviews of the performance, which was an optional assignment. 1 had never even seen a play before. All found the play featuring readily identifiable characters and concerns with dialogue close to their own conversations fascinating. The Wolves has quickly risen to prominence on English language stages, a shockingly popular soccer play that addresses key concerns for sport and its representation in society. Thank you.
Thank you, David. All right, so up next, we'll have our resident birder, Phil Wedge, coming to us from University of Kansas.
Can you see me now? Lost my.
Yes, I can see and hear you, Phil.
Lost my Zoom. There
Yes, we can see you.
Okay. I was really worried about how this was going to work. 2 people presenting on the same topic, as I'm sure some of you wondered too. But this is going to be like the second half, I guess, because I'm having trouble with my screen here. It's like the second half of the Wolves because I'm giving more of a literary reading of the play. So hopefully we're not going to overlap too much. And I have to thank David. I think that's the first time I've ever been cited before I said anything. So that's pretty cool. Can you see my? Trying to make this be full screen, but I guess it doesn't really matter. You can see my slide okay, right?
Yep.
All right. So this is Staging Soccer, Sport Actualization in Sarah DeLapp's play, The Wolves. In her preface to The Wolves, while explicitly asserting the play is not about her own personal experience, I did not play soccer in high school, she says. Sarah DeLapp also claims her play, quote, is not really about soccer, end quote, in the sense that she is developing themes which reach beyond the sports field about teens being forced to see the reality of a harsh world outside the bubble of sheltered lives. I see, as DeLapp puts it, quote, they are desperate to understand themselves and the world around them, but they can only see so far, end quote. But after reading the play and seeing it performed at the University of Kansas, something to add to your dot map there, in December 2019, I must say this is an outstanding play because it manages to bring sport onto the stage more effectively than any sports play I'm familiar with has done before. With the exception of the appearance of Soccer Mom in the final scene of the play, the only actors present on stage throughout the play are the members of the Wolves' under-17 indoor soccer team, identified simply by their uniform numbers, and each scene set on the turf of an indoor air dome in a suburb, that's a quote, follows the players through their warm-ups for a match. Even the seating in the William N. Box Theater at the University of Kansas performance I attended was arranged as bleacher seating on two sides facing soccer turf, complete with a corner flag and a backdrop indicating several indoor fields extending beyond the space of the stage. While the Wolves' current coach, Neil, occasionally sends messages to the team through their captain, number 25, he never appears on stage, nor does any referee, although the audience occasionally hears the ref's whistle, usually signaling the game is about to begin. As DeLapp points out in her preface, quote, on their artificial grass, these girls are allowed to define themselves amongst themselves. Their bodies are their own and they are strong. We do not meet them as the property or accessory of a man, a boyfriend, a father, an institutional custodian. We meet them with each other. We're on their turf. They're not on ours, end quote. Throughout the Wolves, each scene, as underscored by a note on the setting, takes place during the team's warm-up for a game, including, quote, a series of exactly timed stretches and exercises, squats, jumping jacks, quads, hamstrings, butterfly, etc., end quote. While the dialogue between players ranges through many topics from teenage gossip to menstruation to atrocities committed in Cambodia and at Abu Ghraib, the play remains physically and, in my opinion, thematically centered on these young women as athletes. And over the course of the play, the audience watches them prepare physically and mentally for the match ahead by executing passing drills, doing goalie drills, running laps, even in their tournament week, cooling down by running outside and off stage around the arena's dome in the snow. In the staged production I saw, they actually ran that, when they did that scene, they ran around the bleachers, behind the bleachers, talking to each other as they went by. In staging her play this way, even though we never see the Wolves play a second of an actual match, DeLapp has managed to overcome what most sports plays struggle to reveal on stage: athletes performing their sport in front of the audience. While August Wilson's Fences does show former Negro Leaguer Troy Maxson hitting a rag ball with his bat periodically throughout the play, and the ball and bat suspended from and leaning against a tree respectively are always visible to the audience as symbols of Troy's dissatisfied past, only when Troy's son Lyons describes Troy hitting, quote, the ball over the grandstand, end quote, at Homestead Field, do we glimpse his prowess as a home run hitter. Similarly, in Clifford Odette's Golden Boy, whether up-and-coming boxer Joe Bonaparte trains in the gym or fights a contender in Madison Square Garden, the action takes place off stage. In the gym, Roxy Gottlieb, one of Joe's managers, moves his head, quote, to and fro in the rhythm of Joe's sparring off stage, end quote. At Madison Square Garden, scenes are set in the dressing room while the boxing matches are conveyed through crowd noise and the clanging of the ring bell off stage. Damn Yankees includes scenes in the Senators' locker room and dugout, but no scenes set on the field of play, although characters looking on describe Joe Hardy's hitting and fielding exploits. And Lee Blessing's Cobb, mostly set in a locker room, only projects onto a stage backdrop a famous action photo of Ty Cobb sliding into a catcher Spike's high, but shows no sports action on the stage. Brief action is portrayed on stage in a few plays. Jason Miller's championship season has the team at a reunion pass a basketball to one another, but with the fifth starter missing, they quote unquote can't get the rhythm going. Willie Loman in Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman has a memory of his son Biff promising to signal Willie personally during a football game at Ebbets Field. And in The Great White Hope, the audience sees Jack Johnson's shadow box and hit a punching bag in 2 scenes, but the actual bouts take place off stage. In the end, none of these plays manages to come close to showing the athleticism and skills of the sport each features, as well as Sarah DeLapp's The Wolves does. Scene 1 of The Wolves opens with the indoor squad of 9 players aged 16 and 17 in a circle on the soccer field doing their stretching and warm-up routines. Most of the players have been on the club for a number of years, playing together on both the indoor and outdoor traveling team, except for a newcomer, 46, who begins the season as one of the subs for the starting 6 players. Overlapping dialogue between different sets of players within the group quickly becomes the norm in this play, while the team continues its stretching routines prior to kickoff. Periodically, the captain, 25, begins leading the warm-up drills, tries to get the team focused on the match ahead, in this case, against the Hornets. But she faces resistance from the team's striker, number 7, described in the character list as too cool for school, and from her insecure sidekick, 14, who exchange eye rolls periodically throughout the scene, as when the captain calls number 7 out for using foul language. At the end of the scene, the captain has an important interchange with the Wolves' new player, Captain Mode. Great, let's get on out there. Could I play striker? 7 is striker. 7 has always been striker. Oh, it's just we're undefeated and we want to stay undefeated, right? Especially with the college showcase tournament coming up. It's the only spot in football I haven't tried yet. I just thought it might be easier, says 46. The Wolves have gone through a number of coaches, including number 25's father, Frank, who yelled and swore a lot when he coached them on the Blossoms several years earlier. Patrick, their favorite, who's recently moved away to care for his mother, and the current iteration, Neil, an Army reservist who works at Best Buy and whom some of the players consider a creep. But their positions from goalie to defense, midfield, and striker have remained fixed, especially 7's position as striker, always. The captain is not interested in upsetting that dynamic when the Wolves are undefeated. And the players on this elite team, all of whom play on their various high school squads except 46 who homeschools, are focused on the upcoming Showcase College Tournament and the potential of being recruited to play college soccer. 46, newly returned to the States with her mother, a travel writer, has never played on a team with uniforms, she says later in the play, but she has more experience in the sport than her teammates give her credit for. In fact, within a few weeks, she will become their star striker. The sports theme of a newcomer breaking into the starting lineup and improving the team's potential is foreshadowed in 46's simple request to try striker, because it's the only spot in football, not soccer, she hasn't tried yet. In scene 2, the Wolves struggle to focus before playing their next opponent, Fusion, spending time dissing 46, who is late. She takes 3 buses to get to the dome, unlike her teammates who are mostly being driven there or drive themselves. She's late. I suppose we'll just have to manage without her, says 14. And bickering amongst themselves to the point where the captain orders the striker to do laps as punishment. They also pose for photos with orange slices in their mouths, as they did when they played for Coach Frank on the Blossoms. Perhaps it's no surprise they lose this match and ruin their undefeated season. Again, stretching and warm-up exercises are physically performed as the Wolves mentally unprepare for facing goalie Christine Kratzer, nicknamed The Wall. By scene 3, The team's physical preparations have increased as the scene opens dramatically with 25, running backwards, high knees. The whole team runs past doing high knees. A few seconds, they run past again. Butt kicks. They run past doing butt kicks. A few seconds, they run past again. High knees, butt kicks. Grapevine. All right, come in, come in. This takes a couple of pages in the text. Number 25 carries a mesh bag of soccer balls. She empties it. All right, let's hustle. Big game today, and it's not going to win itself. Blue storm is going down, says number 13. This time, as the team goes through passing drills, the dialogue focuses more on beating Blue Storm, making nationals, and not losing as they did to the same team in the all-district tournament the year before. The team pairs off for passing drills, and 46 is left out until she starts a passing triangle with 8 and 11, but she struggles with their pattern of passing and makes a couple mistakes. Not for the first time, jokes are made at her expense regarding the yurt she lives in with her mom, sounding like yogurt, until she finally has had enough and reveals some of her individual soccer skills. 46 intercepts their pass. She juggles their ball. She is amazing. I live in a yogurt. My feelings don't get hurt. Yogurt for breakfast. Yogurt for lunch. I live in a yogurt. My feelings don't get hurt. Yogurt for dessert. Yogurt for... She drops the ball. Everyone is watching. Wow, says number 2. 46 sprints off. 46's juggling routine lasts 20 to 30 seconds on stage and obviously challenges the skills of the actress who plays the part. In the University of Kansas production I saw, this was handled well by Stella Garibaldi, and her skills startled the other players on stage and should impress any audience as well, given the right actor or athlete playing the part of 46. In the play, it leads to the striker number 7 to imagine what number 46 could do on an outdoor squad playing center mid. Quote, if only she could play like center whatever, says 7. Little realizing 46 is about to replace her in the indoor starting lineup. While the captain is off the field talking with Coach Neal, the team even practices a more intricate passing drill than the audience has seen previously. This is what David was talking about. Number 7, let's do the spider web. Righteous. Ooh, I love the spider web. They do the spider web. It's a complicated interwoven passing drill. It's pretty impressive, actually, it says the liner notes. Their victory over Blue Storm that week, perhaps in part motivated by the fact a college scout is there to watch one of their opponents, Jordana Fry, but also by the play of number 46, who starts up front despite 7's protests. She can't even kick the fucking ball straight, she says. 7, whose name we learn is Alex, unfortunately injures her knee in the game. And then, according to 14, Megan aggravates it skiing that weekend, so she will be out of soccer until fall season, thus clinching the starting spot for 46 for the rest of indoor season. Scene 4, opens with the team running on stage from the run in the snow. 7 girls run in from the cold. They're sweaty and pumped up and dusted with snow, it says in the liner notes. They've just won a game in the college showcase tournament and are playing another in 30 minutes. As the players circle up and start the warm-up, the conversation focuses on how well 46 performed in the game they've just played, scoring 5 goals, including 1 fired in on a bicycle kick. 13, shit, guys, shit. Can I just say, that was so sick. Completely nuts. I've never seen anyone play like that, even in like the World Cup. Oh my gosh, she's so good. Who knew, says 14. I mean, she was pretty good last week. That bicycle kick, not like this, man. She's been holding out on us. And like in front of all these scouts? 46 has found her spot, not because she was holding out, as Megan suggests, but because she's been allowed to play a position that can showcase the skills she's honed playing pickup soccer all over the world, far from the bubble of the city sports dome of a town that seems to be modeled on DeLapp's hometown of Reno, Nevada. And when she, the goalie, and Megan are called over to the sideline by Coach Neal to meet a recruiter from Texas A&M, The college coach tells 46, quote, "That bicycle kick could have been on ESPN," end quote. What her teammates assume she's played, while her teammates assume she's played in Olympic development programs and on elite teams before, 46 stuns them by saying she's never played on a team with like jerseys before, end quote. This supports DeLapp's theme regarding the Wolves being insulated by the bubble of suburban life. It takes the outsider, 46, who seems more aware of her surroundings, to spot and identify a bird inside the roof of the sports dome. It's a bush tit, Corey, if you wanted to know. And while most of the team dreams of making nationals at Disney World and are crushed to learn they're in Tulsa that year 46 has much broader experience. And everyone plays football, soccer, like everywhere, like Jakarta, Krakow, La Paz, Kampala, even if you don't speak the language. So it's a good way to make friends. These are all places that she's been, right? By playing well as the Wolves' new striker, she has begun to earn respect from her teammates, even from the striker she replaced, Alex, who tells her, "You looked good out there." And in the college showcase tournament, she has also drawn the attention and compliments of a Big 12 coach. Not bad for someone who didn't know what a traveling team was when she joined the team and who only earned a benchwarmer's jersey number 46 for the start of indoor season. How the tournament ends, we never learn, though the tension between Alex and Megan over their ski trip, which peaks at the end of the scene, can have helped in the next match. Instead, the play takes a dramatic turn in the plot as the audience learns from the remaining scenes that 14, Megan, has been killed by a car as she was going on an early morning run in freezing conditions. A tragic end to an athlete's life, just as she was being noticed by a college scout. The driver apparently hadn't properly defrosted his windshield, and Megan hadn't heard him coming because she had headphones on. Both details gradually revealed in scene 6, the final scene of the play. But scene 5, by far the shortest of the play, uses the physical actions of the goalie to reveal how athletes funnel anxiety and frustration through sport, or at least try to. Timeout. 0-0 lies face down in the middle of the field. The gymnasium is silent a long while. She bolts up. Her eyes are red. She spills open the bag of balls, kicks each ball off stage in a fury. She is panting and wound up and crying. She tears her shirt off and sinks to her knees. In a black sports bra, she holds her shirt and screams. The Wolves have forfeited their league match in the wake of Megan's death. Yet DeLapp brilliantly uses the sport on stage to convey Zero's emotions, dumping out the bag of balls and kicking each one off stage in a fury, a stark contrast to how most plays convey an athlete's fury off stage, as when Joe Bonaparte knocks out his last opponent in Golden Boy off stage, then brags in the onstage locker room that he gave him the fury of a lifetime in that final punch, before Joe learns that punch has caused the death of an athlete, the Baltimore chocolate drop. In the timeout scene, after kicking all the balls off stage, the Wolves goalie then tears off her shirt, sinks to her knees and screams, the iconic Brandi Chastain World Cup pose. But this soccer player is expressing grief through tears and a scream at Megan's death, not ecstasy at scoring the winning penalty kick in the 1999 World Cup. The final scene of DeLapp's play opens much more quietly, with only 2 players present, their static positions a stark contrast to the goalie's actions in the previous scene. To quote the play, 46 sits in the middle of the field, holding her phone. 11 stands at the edge, wearing headphones. They stare at each other. 46 sneezes. Having forfeited the previous week's match and recently attended Megan's funeral, the players aren't even sure if their game is on, as one player after another turns up, and the dialogue focuses not on their opponents, but on Megan's death, her funeral, their former coach Patrick's comments about her at the funeral, and so on. Both goalie and 46 want to play, however, and reinforce, I lost my place. and refocus their teammates on soccer. 0, I would love to win right now. I would really, really love to win. They stare at the Hornets. Anyone want to pass? Sure. They get a ball and pass. Silence for a little bit. When the captain arrives, they have enough for a team and continue passing drills for several minutes until 25 calls for the warm-up stretching that has been a ritual performance throughout the play. Quote, they get in a circle and begin their warm-up, total silence for a while. It feels really good to do the warm-up again. As it turns out, their parents have been texting each other to make sure there's a big turnout to support the Wolves. And not only Coach Neal and former coaches Frank and Patrick are there, but boyfriends and girlfriends, even Megan's mother, who enters the stage, the only non-team member to appear on stage during the whole play, to talk with them, telling them Megan is watching and giving them a little coach speak pep talk. Let's see some smart soccer out there. After the ref's whistle sounds off stage, the injured number 7, Alex, arrives to wish them luck, and the girls, Alex included, draw into a tight circle and begin to chant, "We are the Wolves," beginning at a whisper and growing louder and louder until it feels rabid, raw, and Bacchic. We are the Wolves. Sarah DeLapp has successfully brought the sport she features in the Wolves to the stage, even though we never see a second of the indoor soccer games the team plays. Each scene in the play includes physical interactions between the players as they stretch, run, and pass balls together, while offstage events, 46's bicycle kick goal, 14's death while doing a training run, are central to sports themes in the play. Some of the most dramatic sports moments occur on stage, as when 46 intercepts a pass and juggles it in frustration at her teammates, and 0 suffers alone and takes it out on the bag of balls in scene 6 timeout. DeLapp is not the first writer to claim, as she does in her preface, that her work isn't really about sports, but she has actually written one of the best sports plays out there by bringing physical, athletic moments onto the confining space of a stage for the actors to perform and the audience to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. And I'm appreciative that you provided that bird ID for me. Thank you.
No problem.
So we do have a lot of time for questions because of that built-in 5 minutes for tech issues that nobody needed, because you're all good and competent and know what you're doing. So that's great. So I'll just open up the floor for questions. If people want to type them out, I mean, I'll read them to whoever, or you can just go ahead and unmute your mics. I think, you know, we're all adults here and can handle that. So any questions for any of our presenters?
I have a question for Adrian. First, I wanted to say to David, that's really cool working with the sport and the art so directly. And my brother he was hired to teach Ashton Kutcher how to wrestle for a film one time, Personal Effects it was called, with Michelle Pfeiffer and Kathy Bates. And he was on scene the whole time teaching him how to wrestle and then making sure the wrestling scenes all looked authentic, which is so important for sports people, because when you watch a movie and the scenes are inauthentic, it can really ruin.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah, it's crucial. Yeah.
Cool.
I'm curious
Adrian,
if he was a good wrestler.
pardon?
I'm curious if he was a good wrestler.
Oh, my brother said he was so keen and so intense and so badly wanted to be a good wrestler, but he was, you know, an adult, so he wasn't going to learn to be a good wrestler, but he was super into it. And my brother had a lot of fun, and I think it worked out in the end. The scenes all looked good. And then they hired my brother to be on camera as a referee because they were happy with him and wanted to give him some more money. So I think it was a really neat experience being in that Hollywood sort of environment. Adrian, we've talked about this a little bit, but I still have this question. So I love everything you're saying about class and boxing, and I'm super excited to publish your paper. I know that Stephen Heighton, when he was researching this book, he took up boxing and he had never boxed. And so there he is, an adult with a teenage daughter, and he's boxing against young people to learn how to do it. And he's really into sports. Like, he loves running, he loves everything. And just this week I was telling him about how I've spent my sabbatical coaching swimming, and maybe I should have been writing, but it's been so life affirming to coach swimming. And he's like, oh yeah, he has fantasies about taking off and being a track coach. So he loves sport. And I'm just kind of always wondering, because I'm a red shadow boxer for a while, if that joy for sport comes through, because the way you write about it doesn't come through in the boxing. But then when you're talking today, I wonder if it comes through in the swimming when he escapes to the island and he's swimming. Is there joy for movement and for the body and for, physical activity?
There is some joy for sort of sport and activity in the novel, but it's sort of certainly not the dominant narrative about it. So one of the things I had to cut out to make it fit here was a sort of a lot of writing about Savine's dad, who's also an athlete, both a boxer and a swimmer. And while Savine's dad is like no longer really physically capable of boxing during the novel, this sort of shared appreciation of boxing is still something that gives them both joy. And Savine's dad is also a very, very capable swimmer. And so there is joy of it there. We don't really get too much of it about Savine swimming directly, but we get a lot from the dad directly. Like it specifically talks about his movement through the water and sort of being out of time and that, like how much he gets from that activity. And then later in the novel, when he swims, we don't get that from him directly, but we do get some references to sort of his father's swimming experience. So we do get that joy indirectly through swimming. Although swimming is, despite its presence, it's incredibly present in the novel, probably even more so than boxing is actually, in terms of the amount of time that people dedicate to it. It doesn't have the same impact emotionally or in terms of emotion or on identity as boxing does. I don't know if that actually answers your question at all.
It does. It's such an autobiographical novel. I was thinking while you were talking about it, like even Steve's family has a little cottage outside of North Bay and he escapes there to write and swims, and it's felt very much like you're talking about him instead of the character. There's so many parallels. Interesting. Thank you.
His Q&A was so good. This is a bit of a pitch for the thing that's coming up. One of the things that this particular anthology did is that it got a lot of writer essays or Q&As by the original writers of the novels to go alongside the critical essays. And Stephen Heighton's Q&A is fantastic. Really, really good.
This is for anyone who wants to answer. Phil and David probably most likely. I wonder why Delap starts with this, I think it is apologetic, that this is not a play about sports. And I have some ideas, but what are your ideas or anybody? Because when an author says that, or a writer says that, I question why they do it.
I think they don't want to be pigeonholed, right? And so it's like this is about more than sport, right? Whereas of course for our group that's irrelevant, right? It's, if the sport is there, we're gonna mine it and we're gonna work with it. And
well, it's always about more than, sorry.
Right. Of course, literature is always about more than sport, right? But I think it's because they don't want to be pigeonholed, right? I imagine Arthur Miller would not like it if I called Death of a Salesman a sports play, right? But I treat it as a sports play when I teach it.
But people don't feel the need, like you don't need to say, oh, it's not just about being a salesperson. When you talk about death of the sales, you don't need to make that qualifier in relation to other things other than sport. I think it's about an inferiority complex about sports is just a dumb job thing.
Outside of this group, I think very few people understand that sports literature can be real literature.
That's part of it. You know, Jack, I have just a couple of things to say. One, it denigrates sports. Two, Jack Higgs, when talking about Joyce Carol Oates on boxing, laughed and said she's never been in a boxing ring. And thirdly, David Story, to my mind, who wrote This Sporting Life, he was a professional rugby player. And I doubt very seriously if he would ever say that. And I take it in a way that they don't really know the real essence of sport. And lastly, it's using sports in a way that I find problematic. I mean, it sells, sports sells. A young soccer a play about young soccer players, it's gonna fly. But I'm just curious, I don't know, I find it offensive, frankly, but I haven't read the play.
I also think that I don't really trust authors too much when they talk about their works, and I alluded to this a little bit in the paper that I'm really not all that concerned about her intention. In the same interview where she'd said whatever about wanting it to proliferate, and of course it does, she talks about the play arriving to her, which kind of, I mean, I know that sounds very, much like, the Homeric and Hesiotic, and even, Virgil's conceit of just being the muse, or the muse singing through them. But I really honestly kind of believe that these characters needed to come through. And I think she wants to be taken seriously as a playwright, and is afraid of just being expected to keep kicking out soccer plays or something.
Right.
When she also sees herself, but yeah, again, in terms of the biography on her, she chose theater in high school over playing soccer.
Right.
Again, not to get too much into the biography. I've honestly experienced, I did, some of you know, I did a book of poems for every one of the games at the World Cup in Brazil a few years ago, called Obrigado, a Futebol Epic. And I've noticed a lot of my poet friends will like introduce me as, oh yeah, he's the soccer poet. He's the soccer poet. And even one of my former office mates at Binghamton, Dean Rader, great poet out in San Francisco, and he's done a few poems for the Golden State Warriors, but he's introduced me as, oh, he's the soccer poet. And I'm like, I mean, that doesn't bother me, but to others, I don't know if they're reading, going to care to read anything else. But I really don't trust authors when they talk about the work like that. That's my thought on it.
I found this when I was writing the paper about the schoolgirl wrestlers, and I was communicating with some of the authors, and actually only one of them was actually a wrestler. Out of 4 authors, only one was a wrestler. The others were wrestling fans, and it was interesting how much terminology they used. But when I asked them about this, they were saying they had to do so much research because they wanted they wanted the novel to be quite authentic, but they still didn't feel it was about wrestling. Sharon G. Flake, she writes about, as she said, when I asked her, why did she choose wrestling? And she said, because I'm talking about an African-American kid, and if I talk about basketball, it's stereotype. So I'm using wrestling for different reasons, but I'm not writing about wrestling. I'm writing about this girl having problems and having to address things. Wrestling's just a tool that I use. And she had to do a lot of research. On the other hand, I asked Rich Wallace about wrestling Sturbridge, and he didn't use a lot of wrestling terminology. Actually, wrestling doesn't appear that much in it. Same with what's the other one? Dream Quest. It doesn't appear as much as you think it does. And I asked him about that, and he says, I didn't want it to just be about wrestling. People to just look at wrestling and say, this is a wrestling book. It's about somebody, it's about a young guy trying to deal with his surroundings. Wrestling just happens to be the only way he can do it. The only thing that's there for him. So possibly, that might be a thing with some of these authors, is that they aren't writing about wrestling, and they know, or, whichever sport, they know they're not doing it. They might have experience of it, but they're not writing to promote that sport. They're just using it as a tool. And I think they just acknowledge that.
All right, so I just want to get Jamie Jimmy Ryan in here. He's had his hand up for a while now, but yeah, I think it's a great discussion, and I think one we're constantly having to one degree or another with various presentations. So Jamie, if you want to go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, it's great to hear this stuff, and also like I've experienced what other people are talking about. So it's always nice to have these sort of feelings validated. I just wanted to say, like, I really, really love the Wolves. I've taught it. And so it was really, really interesting to hear 2 presentations on it. I just had a question for David Kilpatrick, because I'm hoping you can offer an interesting perspective since you sort of taught the actors, because in plays, mistakes they can be quite jarring. They can almost take you out of the experience of the play sometimes. But in sports theater, they're almost inevitable. And they're a sort of exciting part of the experience. And so I was wondering, in the Wolves, it's very likely that someone might mess up a step when they're doing their grapevines or something, or a ball might be mishandled. And I was wondering what you and the actors' opinions or feelings on mistakes were, and if the opinions on mistakes developed over the course of the play from sort of practicing, learning lines, doing the practices in the park to the actual performance.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that. I don't know if you could tell where I paused a little bit awkwardly. The videos weren't working, which is probably good for timing, but I had a clip of the closing night where they were doing, I wanted to be able to show you, I had that graph that I came up with to try to explain what the spider web was, but I actually had a little video of them doing the spider web on closing night, and they completely screwed it up. Like, you could see one player doing it right, but some of the others screwed up, and I think it was just nerves, because the first 2 nights they did it all right. Now again, I only, I don't know if cost, I only worked with them 6 times, 4 times in the black box, twice at Central Park. But I had them working on that spider web, months in advance, and there it was on the video. Some of them just completely screwing it up, which I just kind of think is funny, but it was one of those things where I don't know if the audience could tell. To me, it's this beautiful, elegant dance. And to me, to make sure it was choreographed properly, to me, there was something about, and again, it wasn't fidelity to authorial intention. To me, it was fidelity to the text. They were doing this grapevine. These players loved doing this grapevine. So I wanted to figure out what the grapevine was. A week later, I saw, obviously COVID shut everything down just a few weeks later. But the next week, my daughter and I went to see a production at Syracuse, and they did something completely different for the grapevine, because how would you know that that's the grapevine? That's pretty hard to figure out what the grapevine is supposed to really look like. But the audience doesn't know any better, and the reader wouldn't know any better. But with the juggling, the actor, it sounds like the actor playing it at Kansas was able to juggle really well, and nobody got hurt, right? But with the very first rehearsal in the black box, the actor playing that role, she's insisting, she's, oh no, I can do it. And she dropped it on her, rather than roll it and flick it up with her foot, she dropped it on her thigh and started juggling on her thigh, dropped it to her foot, and it went flying. And I'm like, okay, in the original production, they actually didn't, don't worry about it. And so she got over that, and it was cool. But yeah, I think, again, that question of verisimilitude, when I took my daughter to see it, she immediately whispered to me, like in the first scene, Dad, shame on you, they're not wearing shin guards. and she really blamed me, like that was my fault. And I should have made sure, so to her, that screwed up everything. They weren't wearing shin guards. But that night, it wasn't like they made a straight pass. But in that clip that I wanted to share to you, you would have seen the actors screwing up and other actors trying to improvise and kind of bring the dance back into a proper flow. I don't know if watching A Doll's House, anybody screws up the tarantella, but when you're doing the Wolves, it's easy to screw up the spider web.
All right, Kyle, you had a question or comment?
Yeah, thank you very much, Corey. What an awesome panel. This question is for Phil. So by the way, Phil and David, as you were presenting, I was reserving the Wolves from my local library. I'm so excited to read it. So as a live theater geek and someone who's directed poorly and well once or twice, I'm always interested in the use of dialogue, right? Specifically in plays that are about the anticipation of a thing. And so because of that, Phil, I'm wondering if you can talk about, so staging a play about the anticipation of a thing has a very sort of Samuel Beckett feel to me, right? I mean, that's the extreme, right? But it's very Beckett, right? The blocking and the staging is so integral to the engagement with the live audience. I'm wondering if you could talk about Delap's ability to move that narrative through the dynamic of anticipation in dialogue, because if, obviously I've heard 2 papers that say it, this is something that I need to read, and I will. But if not blocked and staged well, I can imagine that this could really go off the rails quickly. Am I reading that properly, Phil?
I guess I'm wondering what you mean by anticipation. Anticipation of the game?
Yeah, that's exactly, right. Yeah. Like because from what I'm seeing, like from what I'm hearing, we never actually get to like the cathartic explosion of the game itself, right? We anticipate the game against, but we never see the game against.
And I imagine Delap might answer, right? If I can channel her, which is a silly thing for me to try to do, but she might answer that it's not about the game, right? It's, I mean, because of course a lot of the dialogue is about all sorts of other things. It's about teenage girls trying to find themselves, not just on the soccer pitch, right? Okay, so I focused in the paper on the physical activity that, the argument I tried to make that this brings sports on the stage better than any other play that I know of, right? Of course, Susan, you're the play expert. You may know plays that I'm not aware of that do accomplish that. But I think that we learn the next week what happened in the previous match, right? We learn whether they won or lost, or we learn about the moments. But I think it is Beckett-like in a sense. There's always that tension of what's going to happen once the whistle blows, once the ball is kicked off. But I think her focus is on the ritual of a team getting ready, right? And I mean, when I think about for me, the sport I played at least the longest, right, was softball. 30 plus years of playing softball, mostly with the same guys, right? And I can remember moments where we had a big game, or when we got 4th at the state tournament or whatever, right? But when I think about it, I mostly think about the ritual of warming up, playing catch before the game, figuring out a lineup, talking after the game over a few beers, right? About how things went. And so I think she's capturing that aspect of sport, right? The team each week, they have their own individual lives. They're going to different schools in a lot of cases, but each week they bond for this time. And she wants to focus on the time that it's just the women, the young women in their sphere. The coaches don't get to come on stage. They don't get to come on the field, right? Which is unusual. I mean, I can't think of, even in college soccer matches, when there's a timeout or a break, the coach is on the field in the circle with the team, right? And the play deliberately keeps the men off the field. And of course, it's ironic that we got 2 men who wrote papers about it, right?
I really appreciate that response, Phil, and I think that the sense that I was getting to, and I completely, again, that response was really fantastic, is that the idea of a play though is like it comes off of the page, right, and it goes onto a stage. And so while we in this room might really love the going super textual on it. The purpose of a play is to play it, to have it on a stage, right? And so
Right.
if DeLapp really wants to get, as we say, get to the back row, if she wants to get to, then what's critical there is that there's a dynamism in the blocking and the staging.
Mhm.
Because if there's one thing that people in this room know for sure, that nothing turns a general audience more off. And we are not a general audience, we're a very specific audience, right? Nothing turns a general audience off more quickly than a group of people talking about that one time we beat Tech in the,
Right.
my goodness, you can just see the blinders go on, right? And so that's why I'm excited to see this on stage, because I can't wait to see how the different, and David, you got at this, I think, really beautifully in your paper as well, the ability to turn, not only to make it look realistic, but to also keep it visually appealing. So we're not just waiting for Rapinoe or whatever, right? Like there's something else happening there. Yeah, but that's awesome. I can't wait. I can't wait to see this. I'm gonna make it a point to see this on stage.
Well, of course, it's also it's what, 170 page play, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there are big chunks that both of us skipped to talk about the sports, right? Okay, and I'm sure that's why any writer would say that my play is about more than soccer, right?
May I just say, I'm not the play expert, Bill. However, we, just so you know, and maybe it's time for something else with drama. We did a special edition of Athlon on drama, and I can't remember when it was. It's been that long ago.
Maybe that's what I was thinking of.
Yeah, and so maybe it's time. That's how I came to understand Story and to like him so much. But given the interest in drama, maybe it's time for another issue about sport and drama. Hi, Bruce. Welcome back.
If I can just say on that issue of, obviously, I love that issue in drama. I'm so very proud to be in that issue. But this is why I mentioned Carol Churchill in the paper too. And DeLapp has acknowledged Churchill's influence in interviews. But I had the great good fortune to be at a rehearsal with Carol Churchill, Max Stafford Clark, and Joint Stock, and I got to see their process. And I had a conversation with Carol Churchill about decisions I'd made as an actor when I was in a production of Cloud 9, and some decisions I made where I didn't realize that a lot in the play had evolved as part of the process, that those weren't necessarily decisions she made. That's why I was trying to emphasize Neugebauer as kind of the original director. I think there are things like the Grapevine and stuff. DeLapp probably didn't know what the Grapevine was. She didn't probably know what the Spiderweb was. It could have been the director, it could have been one of the actors. And in the whole process of workshopping, that first part of my paper where I tried to, it goes from, application to staged reading conference. And then it goes through these awards and it gets to be workshopped and workshopped and workshopped. Drama is so different from fiction, and that to say it's the work of an author really isn't necessarily honest to the whole process when it gets workshopped like that, where the actors, the director, so many people can be involved and things make it into the script. And we think, oh, why did DeLapp put that there? She may not know herself.
That's the absolutely seminal difference, I think. You just hit on the head between drama and fiction. You write the words in drama, and then the stage manager and the director and everybody, no matter what your stage directions are, make that, and the actors make that come to life. In fiction, you don't have that. You don't have the ability for an actor to say, I meant that, or yeah, I meant that, right? You don't have that. And I think that it's more constructive to not ask playwrights what the play is about, but whom it is about. Who are the characters? What are the characters? What are they involved in? Rather than the plot, because plays tend to spring from a premise more than does fiction. And so I never answer that question honestly when someone says, what's this play about? I said, well, they're these people, and I start to tell them who the people are, because if I tell them what it's about, they want a summary, and who wants a summary of something you want people to see? So I think you hit it right on the head, David. Now I'm going to bow out until the business meeting, but thank you for welcoming me back, folks.
Bruce, I think that's
And
what people want with poems and short stories too. What's it about?
Yeah, and I think if I always, when someone says you have a poem in that magazine, what it's about, I go, it's 18 lines long. You could read it. It's like, how do I summarize I took all that and pushed it down into 18 lines.
Wordsworth. It's about daffodils.
Right.
all right, I do want to get Andy in here because he's had his hand up for quite a while.
Yeah, thanks very much. I mean, first of all, I'm interested to see that the Wolves was first staged in Stratford East 2 or 3 years ago, and I was wondering, sort of like, what it seemed to have its premiere there. So I'm wondering how that came about, and therefore there's no transfer back to the United States. But certainly, I'll try to look to watch it if it comes back to London again, which you suggested it would. And I'm kind of sort of interested in sort of like, this idea that, first of all, that the playwright denies it's about sport. And so we've agreed that that's quite common from a lot of authors who write about sport. If I was reminded that Thomas Hughes, when asked about Tom Brown's School Days, said, well, just put the sport in as the plums to attract the readership. My real message is the moralizing, the moralistic message. But of course, no one bought it for the moralistic message. They all bought it for the sport. So kind of how interesting that, even when authors deny that their works are about sport, how audience or readership might not agree with them, and in fact go to watch or read the texts because of the sport. And even I just know Susan mentioned about David's story, and again I've read and written a little bit about this sporting life, but of course he also as you noted the play Changing Rooms, about that changing room sort of culture, and that kind of. But again, I mean, he would say, although he did play sort of professional rugby, at least for a short period of time, that really the text about northern masculinity, about gender, about locality, about class, and the sport again becomes sort of like the site of which to sort of the peg which to hang all that. And I just think it's wondering what was interesting about it. Sport almost prevents itself from being just about sport. It's always got to be about more than that. But I suppose our task, or the task that we sort of adopt, is to try to make sure that sport is given its due and proper place in that process. It isn't just discarded as soon as something more interesting comes along. And that I think that process and that sort of like, and that's all that re-excavation or recovery of sport, and I think it's a really important part of sort of the process that we engage in. I think the audiences do as well, though. I think the point about Tom Brown's School Days, the audience wanted it for the sport, and what the sport was telling them. They weren't interested in his moralizing. They wanted it for the plums.
Andy, that raises kind of a question I had about your paper, and one thing that really kind of shocked me the first time I went to Lord's was this rich literary tradition for cricket. I guess George Plimpton had, his whole small ball theory years ago. I should have known more about it, but the way it's such a part of everything. But when you speak to people at Lord's and the panic they have over T20 cricket, and it seems to me like Netherland is the best cricket novel of the past 10 years or so, and there seems to be a decline. And there was almost towards the end of your paper, almost a lack of enthusiasm for the work that you were talking about. As if like, well, yeah, it's worth reading, but and I wondered, is there something about T20 and its emergence that challenges the literary engagement with cricket itself? Is Netherland? I mean, those passages about cricket in Netherland are they're very brief. They're not essential. Great shout out to Staten Island Cricket Club, great institution, but it's more about the Chelsea Hotel than it is Staten Island Cricket Club.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering to what degree the challenges facing cricket as it evolves for a more fast-paced game, if there's certain literary consequences of that.
I think that's a great question. I think that first of all, I think yes, cricket has attracted a fantastic literary tradition. Neville Cardus, of course, I think so, like first amongst equals, but C.L.R. James, particularly from a political perspective. And you're absolutely right. I think Netherlands, one of the best books I've read. I think it's a tremendous text. But of course, it speaks about this. It's about the post-colonial experience more than anything, as well as about masculinity and travel and cultural exchange and so on. So again, as soon as you talk about it, the sport always seems to depart the scene quite quickly. Obviously, one of the things about cricket, I think, is obviously the rhythms of cricket, I think, are very, very novelistic.
Mm-hmm.
The plots, the unfolding, the stories, the pacing, and the variations of pace, and the unfolding dramas, which of course are unpredictable in the same way as reading a novel. You don't know what's coming next. I think that it's all emotion. And of course, when you go to watch cricket, you don't watch cricket like any other sport. I mean, you go to the bar, you read the newspaper, you read your novel. It's not a sport that you watch like any other sport. So I think all that's it's always meant that cricket's had and attracted the literary tradition, as well, of course, the class elements. It attracted people who are literary people who wrote and read, perhaps more than any other sports. T20 offers a challenge to that because obviously it's a shorter, faster game. I think even the Lord's members have now come to perhaps appreciate that T20 in fact offers cricket a vibrant future that can sit alongside Test matches and the 5-day game and other forms of game, and it's not necessarily a replacement for it. But really for T20, and the heart of T20 is really the Indian subcontinent. And I just wonder whether or not there may well be literary outputs from there that will really take T20 by the scruff of the neck and produce literary outputs about it. It's perhaps not likely to come from the English home of cricket, as it were, because that home now, I think, is now transferred quite firmly to the Indian subcontinent.
Right, and so we are out of time now, which the fact that we used up all that extra time, I think, is a testament to how great this panel was. So, definite round of applause for our presenters. And so we got a bit of a break now, and then at 12:30 Eastern Standard Time is the business meeting. And so one final pitch for that, please attend, same place, same channel at 12:30. So once again, thank you to the panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. That's great. Thank you.